You can kind of tighten these down to no end. If you can find a used mountain bike that needs work, you can save a lot of money by doing the work yourself, and I really make an effort to show you how to do that on our flip bike series. And when I was a broke teenager, I really wish I had that series to watch, because I would reach through the screen and choke the guy who's telling me how to fix up a bike with $4,000 worth of tools. I've read the comments, I hear you loud and clear. It's true, a lot of these tools would actually add up to a significant fraction of the cheap used bike you're trying to fix up. And so today I present to you the $30 AliExpress toolkit. A child could afford these tools. Actually, it's possible a child made these tools. We have here a crank puller, a bottom bracket wrench, 2 different bottom bracket tools, a cassette tool, a chain whip, master link pliers, hex wrenches, a multi-tool to fill in the blanks, and even a pair of pliers with cutters. Yes, $30 for all of these specialty tools. That costs less than a lot of my tools do individually. Prediction: these tools are going to scratch every surface they touch. Let's start by yanking the crank arm off this Cannondale. Now you can pull as hard as you want, you can pry, you can bang on it. This crank arm is not coming off without a crank puller. It's really pushed on there. And so we use a crank puller. This one's made by Park Tool, and I'll take it apart to show you how it works. So this part right here threads into the crank arm. This thread is just here for a crank puller. It's not part of the crank as it works on the bike. Now that's in here. This is gonna push against the spindle and pull the crank arm off. And as you can see, there's this little tip on the end that spins to make sure we're not scratching up the spindle, which actually the bolt threads into. And it yanks the crank arm off quite nicely. Now, of course, to put the crank back on, we just line it up here. We put this bolt back in, and now you'll see why you need a crank puller to remove it. You can kind of tighten these down to no end. Ooh. So that was embarrassing. Let's pull the crank arm off using the cheap crank puller. Now, first let's examine it. This crank puller right here, it doesn't have a handle or anything. We're gonna have to put a wrench on here. These threads feel really rough. Not only are these threads kind of rough, but this little cap at the end, it's just gonna push against the spindle where the threads are and just grind into it. There's no little cap on the end like the Pedros and Park Tool version. And so, hope I don't ruin this crank set. Okay, first, our hex wrenches. $7.75. I really splurged on this. Doesn't have as much leverage as my wrench, but yeah, maybe we'll get even more injured. I'm gonna be super careful. Okay, we have successfully cracked that loose. Not bad. And now, our crank puller. Okay, we'll thread it into the crank arm. Okay, it is against the spindle. I can already tell this is not gonna be as smooth an experience. I think it's working though. And it did its job. It pulled the crank arm off quite nicely. Let's see if we messed up the threads there. No, it's fine. Okay, next up, now that the crank is off, you can see this bottom bracket bearing over here. The cup is held in such a way where you'd have to kind of wrap a channel lock or a vice grip around this. Actually, the right way to do it is this bottom bracket tool. See, it fits right in here, and this was part of this cheap set of tools here. Now, I can already see one very big problem with this. On the ends of this spline, it's just kind of curved. And so when you put it in here, it just wobbles all around. It could slip out. The Park Tool version has really sharp ends. It just fits in like really firm and securely. This one's just a lot less precise, but I think we can get away with it. Oh, this, I don't feel good about this. I don't want to get injured again. Oh, please don't rip my hand off. I'm afraid to give it my all. The 1/2-inch ratchet might be a good option. I don't think it's gonna make that big of a difference. I'll meet you in the middle. I'm gonna use a bigger wrench and see if the extra leverage helps me be more precise. Okay, I'm able to crack it loose. Okay, now I'll use the Park Tool stuff to tighten it back up. It just stays in place. It's kind of effortlessly stays in place. There's a reason why some tools cost more money. It takes some thought, it takes some testing, precision, certain materials, but we were able to do the job with this, and so far, so good. There's a different kind of bottom bracket, the kind we have here in the Kent Travail. I'm gonna pull the crank arm off. You do not need a crank puller for this. It's just got pinch bolts. If you really don't care, you can take a channel lock and put it around this thing and take it off. But there are these little dimples around this bearing, and they make a tool for that. You can see there are dimples in this Park Tool wrench, and it fits on here, and you can turn it. Here is a version that Wheels Manufacturing makes. It's made out of nice soft aluminum, so it doesn't scratch anything. It just goes on there, and you can put a 1/2-inch ratchet in there. Now, one thing that both of these tools have in common is the surfaces are very smooth. They're very nicely machined, so it doesn't scratch this. Sometimes these are anodized, sometimes there's a nice thin coating. Now, I could tell you, this AliExpress $3.53 wrench with a chain whip attached to it, yeah, I'm basically gonna start bleeding if I touch this too much. It is very rough. Let's see what it does to the surface of this. How do I use this? Like, this is so hilarious. They put this rubber thing here, like that's the handle. Like that's where you're gonna grab a tool for something that gets 40 Newton meters of torque. Like you can see how long the Park Tool one is, and it's got this big rubber handle on it. I'm gonna have to grab it here on the chain whip part. So let's give it a shot. That scratched the crap out of it, but it worked, you know, it's all right, but I can already see where the tool was digging in. It gets the job done though. It's better than putting a channel lock over it. It's better than vice grips, and it was enough leverage for me to crack it loose. There's a huge chain indentation on my hand, but hey, success. Now we're really splitting hairs, but just for kicks. I have here my AliExpress microscope, and we're gonna take a look at both of these tools, the AliExpress one and the Park Tool. First, let's look at the AliExpress tool. Yeah, anytime you magnify something, it's gonna look worse. You're gonna reveal everything. I'm sure the Park Tool one doesn't look perfect either, but that is a pretty janky edge. Now let's look at the Park Tool one. Keep in mind, the Park Tool one I've been using for years. The Park Tool one looks dramatically better. It looks like an actual curve, not a whole bunch of like little pieces of metal sticking out. On a smaller level, this is just gonna scratch up your bike part a whole lot less. So take from that little microscope view what you will. Here we're at the drivetrain still. There's another tool you're gonna need when working on a drivetrain, and that is Masterlink pliers. These were $1.97, and actually, you don't only get the Masterlink pliers, you get this little piece of wire right here, and I'll show you what that's for in a second. These are my Park Tool Masterlink pliers, and as you can see, they are much bigger. There's a lot more leverage here, but they're not spring-loaded. These ones are. Definitely not as much leverage. There's no padding on the handles. It's called Risk. Let's see if these deliver what they promise. So the way these normally work, you have here a quick link. You have to squeeze it in order to get it off. So we'll take our Park Tool pliers and remove it first. We're just gonna put it in the chain. We're gonna give it a squeeze and it pops loose. And then from here, you can see the chain comes apart. If we wanna put it back together, we line it up. Now you can actually pedal it back together, but most quick link pliers you can actually use in reverse. So you put it back on the link and you push outwards and it snaps it back together. Now our chain is back together. Let's try the AliExpress ones. So first of all, everything here is spring-loaded because of the derailleur. That's what this is for, this little piece of wire. You snap it onto the chain before you start doing your work. And what does it do? It stops the chain from flying apart when you take off your quick link. That's a pretty cool little thing. So with that, let's give these a shot. We'll put them in here. Not as much leverage, but with very little effort, it cracks loose. And then here, if we take this apart, you can see our little piece of wire held it together. These ain't bad. I might keep these around in my travel kit. This is the best tool we've seen so far. These work great. They're spring-loaded. let's put it back together with these now. And pop it back together. Perfect. This is the best little tool ever for $1.97. I would highly recommend it. But that is not the only thing you have to do with a chain. When installing a new chain, you have to remove the proper amount of links to size the new chain for the bike. And so you need a chain tool. We have 2 of them in our $30 AliExpress toolkit. We have one dedicated chain tool that came with this little $6.96 tool medley. And we have the one in the multi-tool. We are going to test them both by popping a link out of this little length of chain. All right, this is pretty bare bones. So if we want to pop a link out, we're gonna lay it down into the chain tool. Doesn't exactly fit right, to be honest. Am I doing something wrong here? I think I did something stupid. Is this chain tool actually a fail? Guys, this chain tool is a fail, at least for this 11-speed chain here. These fences are too thick for a narrower chain. It'll work on like probably a big BMX chain or something, but you can't get it onto the fence to hold it in place. All right, luckily we have a backup chain tool in our multi-tool. Let's see how this works. I think it's going to work, but I think it's gonna be difficult. Not a whole lot of leverage here. Okay, it fits into the gate, but how to hold this? I'm gonna have to just put my whole hand over it. You're not really gonna see what's going on too well. Wow, that is rough. That is so rough. Wow. This could do with some grease, but we got the job done. This should pop right out. And it sort of damaged our chain a little bit, to be honest. It sort of crushed it and mangled it. I think it would still be usable. And our chain tool is actually damaged. Yeah, you can't use this chain tool again. Taking a link out of a 11-speed chain ruined this chain tool. So unfortunately, we got 2 AliExpress chain tools, and both of them are unfortunately a fail. And so I think you're gonna have to go on Amazon and spend a king's ransom, $5 or $6 to get a real chain tool. And with that, the next thing I was going to do was test the spoke wrenches. I'm gonna tell you right now, don't use these spoke wrenches. You can mess up a spoke nipple even with a good spoke wrench if you over tighten it. These contact barely any area on the spoke. You're better off using a needle nose plier than these. These are terrible. My Crank Brothers F15 comes with good spoke wrenches in it. This is a joke. You want to ruin your spoke nipples and create a big project for yourself, then yeah, go ahead and use these spoke wrenches. Next up, something you're probably gonna have to do if you're upgrading a old or cheap bike is change the cassette for a bigger one with more range. This cassette over here is held on with a lock ring, and we just so happen to have an AliExpress cassette lock ring tool. Now, as you can see, this AliExpress cassette tool looks a lot like the one from Park Tool, although I'm sure these surfaces are more precise. Basically just fits into the lock ring on the cassette. Seems like the AliExpress one does too as well. Let's take our adjustable wrench and see if we can get this cassette off. So it fits in, and then you put the wrench around it. Now the only problem is when you turn it, it just turns the cassette. So you have to hold the cassette still. That bottom bracket wrench actually has a chain whip on it. And so the chain whip is included here. If we want to hold the chain still, we just wrap this chain whip around it, brace it up against there, and then we can pull against it. Flawless. We have a winner. This cassette tool, it did just fine. Next up, the needle nose pliers. Now the reason I bought these is that they serve a lot of functions, and you can also cut things, mainly cable and cable housing. Now needle nose pliers are not designed to cut cable and cable housing, but you most certainly can in a pinch, and so we're gonna see if it can do that. Now, next to it here, I have these Park Tool needle nose pliers, and I've had these for years. Let me demonstrate. I'm gonna take this shift cable, boom, you can cut off pieces of it nice and clean, doesn't leave it all frayed at the end. You can cut it right off. And if we have a piece of cable housing, again, these are not cable housing cutters, but in a pinch, you can cut cable housing well enough. Again, not the right tool for the job, but it'll get the job done with a little bit of effort. So will our AliExpress needle nose pliers serve as cable cutters? Yeah, it left the end a little bit squashed down, but that's okay. This is usable. I do worry about how they would degrade over time. As I said, I've had these for years. Let's see if we can cut a piece of housing. Ooh, that hurts. Yeah, the male grip strength has declined over the last 30 years considerably, but I was able to do it with the Park Tool ones. All right, let's put it in the vise. Yeah, if you're really strong, you can do it. Let's take a look at these under the microscope. Okay, so I have these pliers closed, and what we're looking at right now is where the two cutting edges meet. And to be perfectly honest, it just doesn't look that bad. But let's take a look at the Park Tool pliers. Oh, that is a massive, massive difference. Okay, now it should be pretty obvious why these couldn't cut housing and these could with just my hands. Guys, I'm honestly kind of disappointed. I thought these were all gonna work. I figured they might be difficult to use. Maybe they would mark up the bike a little bit. I certainly didn't think that the bottom bracket tool was gonna give us a problem. It's just rounded off on the end. And I don't know whether that was a dumb design decision or whether it is just poor manufacturing. Now the chain tools obviously didn't work. On this one, the fences were too wide for an 11-speed chain. And on this one, the fence just bent, and it was really rough and difficult to turn. The needle nose pliers were okay. We could definitely use them to cut cable, but for cable housing, doesn't quite make it. The Park Tool ones were able to do both with relative ease. And so these tools, I cannot recommend. But these ones actually all worked. Let's start with this cassette tool. Simple, easy, definitely worked. Would recommend. You could probably get one of these not in a pack of other tools for like $1. I mean, everybody should have one. Crank puller. Not the greatest, a little cumbersome to use, but it pulled the crank off. I actually bought a standalone crank puller for $2.54. This one's a lot better. You can turn the end with a wrench instead of some weird giant Allen key, and it's got the little spinny thing. You'll probably lose it, but this is much better, and I would recommend this. Next up, Masterlink pliers. 10 out of 10. These little guys are great. They were able to remove the Masterlink, even comes with a little piece of wire. We were able to snap it back into place. They're spring-loaded. You can even keep it closed. I mean, I can't say enough good things about these Masterlink pliers. Next, the bottom bracket tool chain whip combination. The thing worked. It's kind of hilarious that they put this grip right here because it's like 40 to 50 Newton meters of force you need to put on it. But I was able to just push on this end and make it work. Chain whip definitely worked. And actually, there is a lock ring tool right here. It's fine, it works. And then these wrenches. I like these little wrenches. They're color-coded, they're attractive, they have the sizes printed on them, they have these ball ends. I didn't have any problem using them. And yeah, I splurged on them. They were $7.75, but I would recommend them. I'm gonna keep these around. In fact, I'm gonna keep these wrenches, this set of Masterlink pliers. Yeah, I'm gonna keep those two things probably in my travel toolkit. So like I said, I'm disappointed. I was hoping that all of these would just work great because I want people to be able to afford to fix up bikes. I think, in truth, you would have to spend something like $38 to get some viable tools to do that. And so maybe we'll do a future video. I'm gonna keep my eye out for good affordable tools, and I'm gonna start collecting them until I have a toolkit that I think would work. And so these are my official recommendations for decent tools that you could use right here. If you enjoyed this video, you would have gotten it 2 weeks early on Substack, and it would have been ad-free. If you sign up on the free tier, we do drop freebies now and again. I hope you learned something today, and if you didn't learn anything, well, I hope you at least found this entertaining. Thanks for riding with me today, and I'll see you next time.